Hello and welcome to another episode of Together, the podcast, a God TV production. I want to welcome you all to today's show. I've got a great guest. I'm joined by Phil Knox from the Evangelical Alliance. Phil, welcome to the podcast.
Mate, so good to be together.
Yeah. Well, my name's Ian Young. I'm the operations director here at God TV, and the podcast is a place where we get to have in-depth conversation with interesting people, and we get to hear what God is doing in and through your life. So, Phil, what are we here to talk about today?
Well, let's see. But I think we're going to talk about grief. We're going to talk about calling, meaning, purpose. We're going to talk about friendship. We're going to talk about the poor, but also really what I'd love to talk about is what it means to really live all out for Jesus in today's day and age. We'll see where the conversation goes, but I think some of those themes will come through.
Yeah, sure. Wow. So if you're listening or you're watching, hang on, we've got some big topics coming up. So grief, friendship, the poor, our calling, evangelism, maybe a bit about spiritual attack as well.
Bereavement and suffering.
Right.
Some highs and lows, I think it's fair to say.
You said that smiling, but I don't feel like that's like a smiley subject.
I was thinking of the highs while I was talking about the lows.
Right. Phil, it's, I'd say we're new friends. We've known each other for a while, but really only got to know each other the last few days. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And before we get into, the meat of the subjects where we're all going to try and learn a bit more about Jesus and ourselves, I guess, and a bit, if you're not Christian, about how you might deal with these subjects too. So, bear with us, because I think there's good teaching in here for everybody. But as a Christian guy, I've been taught that discernment's important. And I know you a little bit, so I trust you, and hopefully that's meaningful to everyone at home that, they trust my discernment. But also, how do they discern that, I'm going to listen to Phil Knox. Who's Phil? How do I trust what he's got to say? So I just want to know a little bit about, your story, what family you're from. Have you always been a Christian? When did you give your life to Christ? So just give us a quick snippet of who's Phil Knox and where did you come from?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, mate. So I was born in Sheffield, and I'm hurtling towards 40. So I was born in 1983, born in Sheffield. Two amazing Christian parents.
Do you want to give me your address and your postcode as well? Because I probably
born in Sheffield. Two amazing Christian parents. But my kind of spiritual heritage is actually my grandfather came to know Jesus during the war.
Wow!
So he was stationed on a Scottish island off the west coast of Scotland called Islay, famous for its whiskey. And during the war, an army chaplain shared the gospel with him, and he gave his life to Jesus, and he basically was so transformed by the good news of Jesus. He came home from the war. He was a very forthright, amazing kind of extroverted character, and he led his whole family and his wife's family to the Lord.
Wow.
Off the back of that kind of moment. And so kind of my spiritual heritage is just amazing. Some great kind of third generation, if you like, kind of Christian in my family. Dad was senior partner in a law firm. And really, really wealthy man, but really godly man. And I'm basically from a family of lawyers and evangelists.
Right.
So that's part of the kind of DNA.
How does that go together?
Yeah, good question. Well, do you know what? Really interestingly, a lot of kind of evangelists have been lawyers before. You look at someone like Nicky Gumbel. Was a lawyer before, and others. And so I reckon I became a Christian. I made a decision to follow Jesus when I was 6 years old. Kind of was dragged to church ever since I was a fetus, really. I kind of grew up through Sunday school, but made a decision in a big marquee, a Christian festival. Someone told me that I needed forgiveness for my past, God with me in my present, and hope for the future. God, I knew that I needed my sins forgiven. Even though I was 6, I knew I was a bit of a naughty boy, so I needed my sins forgiven, and I could know Jesus and go to heaven when I died because of the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I thought that was the best news ever. I was even more excitable then than I am now, and recognised that was the first decision moment. And then, I had amazing teenage years. I grew up on a council estate, actually. So mum and dad was a really wealthy man, very successful lawyer. We could have lived in most houses in Birmingham. They moved to Birmingham when I was 3 or 4. We could have lived in most houses, I reckon. And actually, they got some stick, actually, from some friends who said, what on earth are you doing? We moved to a really poor area because that was where God called my family.
Wow.
But, I never really questioned it, actually. It was one of those things where, actually, it made the difference seeing kind of my parents having made that decision to do that made me think, actually, this faith thing, really, there's a cost to it. And if my parents would do that, then there might be something in it. That was a real kind of helpful thing through my teenage years. Yeah. But you know what? I was, I'm an enthusiast now. I was an enthusiast as a teenager. Loved football, loved school, great mates around me. And then did what Knoxes do, went to universities to study law. But the rubber really hit the road for me. I was 21. I was at university having lunch with my mum, and the phone rings. My phone rings, and it's a family friend. And she says some words I'll never forget. She says, "Phil, I'm really sorry, but this morning your dad has died." And I've got to say, even well enough talking about it now, those words tore my world apart, because we were a really tight-knit family. Got a younger brother and sister. Steve, my brother, was 13. He found my dad, and he basically had an aneurysm problem with his heart. And one Saturday morning, it had just burst, and he died. And
it's terrible.
And I mean, you talk about life-defining moments. And do you know what?
So you had no idea. You
no,
didn't know
no idea. No,
and no planning or money. It was just.
And
Phil, what's your mum and dad's name? Let's just honour them.
Yeah. So my dad's Martin, mum's Janet, and mum. Yeah. So dad, amazing guy, and just I think in that moment, I talk about kind of junction moments. I don't think I ever seriously considered it, but I do look back and go, I could have said, stuff you, God, for letting this happen.
Yeah.
I'm done. How on earth can there be a God who would allow this? Dad was a faithful follower of Jesus. I could have walked
setting away. A great example, living somewhere, committing his life to the church.
Could have walked away. So that was a real junction moment.
So how old were you when your dad
21.
died? 21. That's young.
How
old is your dad?
48. But what happened was, as a family, it was extraordinary, really. My brother was 13 at school. My sister had just started a gap year in Italy. She flew. I'll never forget the moment Debs came back from she had to get a flight emergency back. Sunday night, Dad died Saturday morning. Sunday night, Debs came through kind of security at the airport, and that was really one of the harrowing moments, really. And haven't really talked so much about that. But as a family, I remember sitting down and going,
Don't move on for that moment. Just say, why was that impactful?
Because I love my sister, and she's 18, and that's just died. Yeah. I mean, but and as a family's important. Family's important, and there was So as a family, then I remember sitting down in the living room, going, what are we going to do? What are we going to do?
Yeah.
And my mum was an absolute rock at that time.
Right.
She had a moment actually that night where she's lying in bed, her present's agony, future's uncertain, just had 25 years of marriage with the man she loved, and she's thinking, what does the future look like? And she remembers a verse actually from both my parents were well into a lot of scripture memory. She remembers a verse from Psalm 68 that says, "A father to the fatherless and defender of widows is God in his holy dwelling." Psalm 68 verse 5. It's been really important to our family. And
just say that again. Say that.
Father to the fatherless and defender of widows is God in his holy dwelling.
Wow.
He sets the lonely in families. That's what Psalm 68 verse 5 says. And so she had this moment of promise at that moment.
Yeah, and hope in real darkness.
Yeah,
right?
And so we sit together probably on the Monday. So that had been the Saturday night. Debs arrives back on the Sunday. On the Monday we sit together.
So have you got how many siblings have you got?
Two. So younger sister is 3 years younger, and brother who was 13 at the time.
Oh, okay, wow. Yeah.
And we sit together, and actually as a family, we decide we're going to cling to Jesus. And I've been a Christian for...
How does that conversation happen?
Like that.
I'm not from like a Christian family, so like how
we
does
sit
that look
we
in a
sit
Christian
together
family?
and we talk to each other, and there's lots of tears. I can't remember loads of it, but I do remember the collective sense with which as a family we were going to go.
But did you say that words, or is that you
probably,
sort of 2020 hindsight looking back?
Paraphrase looking back, a lot, it was a while ago, but there was a moment where we kind of said, I met or a decision in our hearts, but the conversation was we need God. I came out of that room with no doubt that my brother, my sister, and my mum and me were like, we're going for it. We're gonna, we're gonna lean on the prayers of others. We're gonna lean into God at this time. And I've been a Christian for 33 years. Did the maths? Yeah, 33 years. The closest I've ever known God was in those first few weeks after Dad died. In a kind of almost tangible, just inexplicable way, I'd say the prayers of others really helped. But I think in terms of if you ask me when was the moment you knew God to be closest, I think those first few weeks after Dad died, in a real, presence of God with me.
Can you talk about the grief? Because I guess we're talking about like what happened, but obviously we've said grief is the subject. So what did you feel at the time? Because you say what you did to deal with how you felt, but I'm not quite sure exactly what. I can't imagine it. It hasn't happened to me.
I mean, just pain.
Pain.
Like physical pain. Almost physical pain. Utter. Uncertain. Your whole world. It's like the phrase "your rug is pulled out of your whole world." It does feel like that. I'm sure those listening to this who've known the death of a loved one, and don't get me wrong, to lose your dad, 21, is not the worst. Almost, there's no grades of grief, are there? I guess, but no. but you think people who've lost children, people who've lost siblings. I've not had those things happen to me. Right. But for me, it was agony. It was, I cried a lot. And I think I think what happens in grief is you try to cope in lots of different ways, and some of those might be. I remember my the night Dad died, my best mate. We'll talk about friendship in a bit, but my best mate, he was at uni in Wales. He dropped everything, comes and he kept saying, it's really funny. We'll talk about friendship. My best mate, he just kept saying, I don't know what to do. I don't know. He really wanted to do something. He's an activist. He wanted to do. And actually, what he did was perfect. Yeah. He was just with me. Yeah. And I remember really vividly being sat in my kitchen on the kitchen worktop at 3 a.m, the night after my dad died. Of course, couldn't sleep. And I'd just stayed up. We were 21. We used to be up at 3 a.m. But I was just crying. And then I had this moment. And the waves of the little moments of realisation keep coming. So I had this moment where I realised my dad would never meet my wife if I got married, my kids if I had them, and just another wave of grief comes out. And then, so you go from that to then just wanting to play FIFA. Do you know what I mean? You go from that extreme, to just wanting some degree of escapism, right? So you then, my auntie took us around the local supermarket and we could put whatever we wanted in the trolley. And for those 10 minutes, it was bliss, a bit of consumer therapy and let's put some wagon wheels in, chocolate bars are available, and so I think you go from kind of that escapism moment to just grief and hugs and so that all of that, but
was there any judgment in that? I just imagine, I know how I am, right, and you might not have been like this, but. I'd be thinking, what would other people think? Am I grieving right? Yeah. How was the rest of the sort of world with you? Your other friends and
I don't
work and everything.
Judging at that point, I think if there was some obvious, self-destructive moments, if I'd gone to the casino with my life savings, if that had been, that might have been, or maybe even gone out and drunk myself stupid or whatever. There might have been some judgment there, but I do think you're allowed a bit of wallowing time, and be kind to yourself in those moments. The other two pieces of advice people gave me in terms of that was walk slowly. And you can only what that means you can't explain until you're actually in the moment, but walk slowly through grief and treasure the past, making those moments. Don't make quick decisions. Certainly don't make life decisions in those moments. Walk slowly. That was I think my mum kind of really encouraged us to do that, and people were telling her that. I think one of the other things I found really helpful was a guy called Jono who sat me down, who was a guy who I was at university with, a few years older than me, and his dad had died fairly recently as well. Right. And he basically said 2 of everything. 2 birthdays, 2 of your birthdays, 2 anniversaries, 2 Christmases, and then it gets a little bit easier. Right. So in terms of the grief process, I'd say that was really helpful advice. And as I've had moments, one of the most wonderful things about ministry is, God comforts us so we can comfort others. As the Bible verse says, there's a moment I think for us where I have had the privilege of walking alongside others who've lost their parents, and that, so for Jono to come alongside me in that moment and give me that counsel was really valuable. I think the other thing that's really interesting is, we'll come on to friendship in a bit, but the people who are around you, you can be selective. People don't mind. Everyone says, if there's anything I can do. Do you know what the most useful thing, if you're comforting someone who's grieving? Don't say that. Just do something.
Right.
Make a meal, bring a card. Actually, don't say, because the person grieving hasn't got a shopping list.
You're not going to ask. You're not going to ask.
Isn't going lobster thermidor, bottle of champagne. That they're not thinking that. They're just in survival mode.
It's a really good point, because I think I say that a lot, and I mean it.
Of course.
Because I'm like, oh, Phil, anything I can do for you. Even now, as I see your eyes are a bit glassy and I can see that pain, I'm like, oh, Phil, if there's anything I can do for you. Like it's just such a an English thing to say.
It is.
But it's a really good tip, because, like, you're not going to go, oh, great, Ian, could you give me a lift here? Or, it doesn't have to be lobster, but, it's a really good advice.
And it's okay not to come to the door.
Right.
So there's sometimes when I've been in the pit of bereavement, someone's come round to see me, and actually I don't want to. It's okay to go. No, I don't want to.
Yeah,
that's okay. Yeah. I think, and also recognising, if you're the comforter, if they don't want to see you, that's okay too. Even if you're quite a close friend. And then some people, I've had some friends come say, "Should we go for a walk?" And going, yeah, that'd be great. And actually, that's been really helpful. So I think that's kind of, but that presence of people is really key.
Yeah. So I think it's more like a specific invitation rather than a generic one. So would you like to go for a walk, rather than anything I can do for you? And I guess it's thinking about the different love languages. So acts of service, words of encouragement, all those things. And if I don't know Phil well enough to know exactly what they are, well, I'm going to try all 5.
Yeah, exactly. But also kind of being prepared that that might.
Yeah, they might just want nothing.
Cutting people slack and I think the indulgence thing, the kind of having 3 kebabs 3 nights, or whatever in a week, is okay for the time being. If I was still doing that 20 years later. Yeah. To mourn the loss of my dad, there'd be a problem.
Right.
But I think there's a moment actually where be kind to yourself in those, when grief hits. Be kind to yourself, and I think I spent more hours playing Football Manager or whatever than I would usually. That's okay in those do what you need to do to get through those few initial weeks.
Yeah, and I think not just as Christians, but as humans, we need to find compassion for people that are grieving, because they do weird things. Like we were talking about this last night, and. Yeah. You had some great examples. If I can't remember I don't know if you want to share them or not, but I thought they were interesting. That it gave me a moment to. I know some people that are grieving, and my heart is I want to help them with it, but my sin is I get frustrated with it too, and so I wonder how many people at home might not be grieving, but know somebody that is, and is like, oh come on, it's been 2 years now, Like, and actually, it might take 2 birthdays, and then it's not better.
No, just I would say there's a kind of, if there's a graph, the curve just helps after that couple of years. So yeah. There you go. Anyway, all to say, that moment in my life, we're still on the life story, we're only at 21. All to say, that was a kind of key moment. We can dive back into grief a bit later if we like. But
I think there's something interesting that. Changes your life as well, and I don't know when that is, but there's something about your dad's condition and you as well.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess the next stage of my journey was that kind of finished uni, and then was really praying about what to do next.
What did you finish your law?
No, I deferred a term.
Okay.
So I didn't graduate when everyone else graduated in the summer. I kind of had an extra term, so I graduated in the winter. And again, here's the interesting thing: it meant that my time frame shifted, so that the next stage became possible.
Right.
So I don't think my dad died to make that happen, but God in His
God uses all things for
God
His
in
glory.
The big plan somehow made this happen. So then what happened was, I said in the summer I wasn't, but in the summer I started praying about what to do next, and I was I think one of the most beautiful things that God gives us in our story is meaning and purpose. We'll come on to that in a bit. Yeah. But
just before you skip on, you said a Christian-y that I just...
Oh, go on.
I just want to ask what that means.
Yeah.
You said praying about...
Yeah.
Like, what does that look like for you? Because, people say it all the time, and I'm like, does that just mean you're thinking about
really
it,
simple. Yeah, no, it's actually talking to God.
Yeah.
So that summer of whatever it was, 2005, I spent time with God every day, reading the Bible, praying. In those times that I was doing that, I was saying, God, I don't know what I'm doing in my life.
Right.
Will you help me? How will you help me? Either through a verse or someone else or a Bible, show me, help me make the next decision. And it wasn't a big booming voice, but what happened over the next couple of weeks was that I'd been volunteering for a Christian charity called Youth for Christ as a student on weekends away. Absolutely brilliant. You get to go and be Anton Deck and Bear Grylls and everybody else for a weekend, seeing some young people do abseiling and climbing. And then on, every morning and evening, there's like a road show, which is the Anton Deck bit, and there's games, and then there's a bit of a Christian talk. And I've always just loved seeing people come to know Jesus. As a child, as a teenager, I always wanted my mates to become Christians, and so as a student, partly because the food was better than it was at uni on these weekends away, I'd go and volunteer on these weekends away. And
just for people listening around the world, like, how would you describe Youth for Christ? If people are listening in India or America, like, what is it?
I mean, hopefully people in India and America will know, because Youth for Christ, big international organisation, massive global, with the single mission of taking good news relevantly to young people.
Right.
Founded by Billy Graham. The kind of tagline when Billy Graham started was geared to the times, anchored to the rock.
Right.
So that with the mission of seeing young people encounter Jesus, hear the good news, and become Christians.
Yeah, I love that.
And so I kind of volunteered for this great organisation, doing weekends away, seeing kids become Christians. And so then what happened was the guy who was running those weekends gets married. And you can imagine when you're working every weekend doing those things, it's not necessarily the most helpful job to do as a married person. So he then got another job, and so his job became available. And then I was at his wedding as he's getting married and about to move on. And I met basically a friend who now is one of my best friends, called Gavin, and he was the boss of that team. And Gavin and I have a chat, and there's a moment where he says, would really like you we've been hearing about you volunteering on these weekends, really like you to think about applying for this job in the team running these weekends. And this was within 2 weeks of me beginning to pray about my future.
Yeah.
And suddenly there's this moment where one of the things I'm really passionate about, someone comes up to me and says, here's an opportunity. First time it's happened, and I'm like, okay. So genuinely, there was a moment where I'm like, that seems coincidental or God-incidental. But I still continue to pray about it. So off the back of, I remember driving home from the wedding saying, Lord, that's quite exciting. That fits with maybe something. But is this right? And so we continued to pray, had this real sense of peace, but also the timing seemed to fit as well. So actually the job started the week after my last law exam. That was then kind of the beginning of February 2006. And so I, took my last law exam, did okay. The plan was then thinking about, and then the job interview was 2 weeks later, and was successful and joined Youth for Christ. And the kind of plan was, I think in my mind at the time, I thought, I'll do this for a few years and then see what happens and maybe go back to law.
Right.
But actually, I just fell in love with seeing people's lives transformed by Jesus in that setting, in that sense. And so, I think, but all to say, if you're listening to this, I think one of the best things about following Jesus is your life's not an accident. There's meaning, there's purpose, and that's not just in Christian ministry. That's in all kinds of ways. God calls us to different people, to different places, and that God really does have purposes and can partner with us wherever we are to make a difference. And so I found that within kind of Youth for Christ. But as you alluded to, then one of the next significant junction moments was when in my early 30s, I was. Because of what happened to my dad, I had some checks done on my heart, and then I found I've been diagnosed with the same heart condition that killed my dad.
Yeah.
And that's been a moment.
That sounds pretty scary, Phil. Before we talk about that, I've just got a question about the evangelism.
Yeah.
Like one of the we've got a shared experience there, right? So
yeah.
One of the greatest things that I'll never forget, it was with another youth mission called the Message Trust. Is I went to one of these gigs. There's 5,000 kids there, and it was the first one I'd been to. I knew I had a heart for evangelism. I kind of wanted everybody to know about Jesus because I knew that it had given me eternal life, and I'd fallen in love with that. I didn't know what an evangelist was. I just had a heart for that, and then I later found out, you're an out-and-out evangelist.
Yeah.
But there's something different about when, like young adults, like really grasp the concept, not just here, but in their heart. And what was really real about the situation at this gig was, it's not like God descends and all the kids behave and everything's just like glorious and wonderful, because when you tell the story, sometimes you can glorify that, but it was the realness, the greatness of like, there's some lads taking the mick, throwing stuff around, taking the mick, calling me names.
Yeah.
And then through the crowd parted, and there was this young woman that just floods of tears running down the face. And I just knew that like she'd been touched by Jesus. Like you could just see that Jesus spoke right into her heart. And she's like, I don't know what to do. Can you pray for me? And I'm like, well, just a minute. I just need to go get some female ministers. So I'm like, I grabbed Colette Dallas, who was the finance director at the Message Trust, and like we prayed this girl into the kingdom for the first time. And then Colette took her off, and I'm sure we gave her a Bible and tried to plug her in with the church and all that good stuff. But that was one of the most amazing experiences ever. And people often say to me, how do you know if you're an evangelist? I'm like, well, you just do. It's like, like, how do you know anything? How do you know who you love? You just fall in love. For me, it's the idea of eternity, because like, I don't think that girl's now going to go off and have a perfect life. But I know that she's got an eternity with Jesus, and God says that that's going to be good. And like that just really motivates me. So my encouragement for everybody is like, evangelism isn't just for nutters like you and I. It's the Great Commission is to share Jesus with people. So I just want to take a moment to say there's like the great joy in it. Encourage people at home, tell people about Jesus.
If the thing in your heart that moves you most, where you're like, is people's lives being changed by Jesus, then there's something that God's doing around evangelism in your heart. If that's your passion, So for me, I can recognise it from a really early age. I got every single lad in my class when I was 8 to come to Boys Brigade at church. Right. Not because I wanted them to have a good time at Boys Brigade, but because I thought it might lead to them going to heaven and knowing Jesus. And I just thought I loved God so much. I wanted to know God. I wanted to know God so much. I want everyone else to know that. Yeah. And if that's the thing, that's just like, that's the fire in your heart and the steel in your bones, then there's an evangelistic heartbeat there, and nurture that and go for that. And God might want to partner with you in that.
Yeah, and I just want to encourage you, Phil, like hanging around with you for the last day or so. I love evangelising. I used to do it everywhere and to everyone all the time. And since COVID, just from being locked in and getting out of the habit, I've just kind of lost that. And like you prayed for the waitress when we went for tea last night. And I just, honestly, you so encouraged me. And I'm like, I'm going to start doing that again. And right. I don't think I'd stop doing it because I didn't want to. It's just getting out of the habit and like you just have a really beautiful energy for that, and I just want to thank you because last night was great, and it just reminded me how much I love Jesus and how much I wanted to tell people about him, and reminding myself that that's okay, and to take the risk, because Jesus has got it. So I think the next part of your story, Phil, is really scary. Can you tell us a bit about like the heart condition and what it means for you, like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I mean, very little. So I'd say day-to-day, very little. I've got a dilated aortic root. What's been lovely is actually, as I've kind of talked about it, some people have got in touch and gone, I know what that is. Right. I've got one too. It's great fun. Anyway, but but I mean, great. It helps knowing about it. But I've got to say that the most painful moment was in those first few months after diagnosis, where you just become aware of your own, not only your own mortality, because we're all aware of that. All of us will die one day. But I guess the thing I've become aware of is it could happen at any time. And most of the time, I'm not thinking about it now. I'm not thinking about it.
Well, you are now, because I've like reminded you about it.
I'm not in this moment going, I'm going to die.
Yeah,
you know,
please don't.
No, I've been for a run this morning. If it was going to go, it was probably going to go then.
Right,
I'm not in great shape. But how there were moments in those first few months after diagnosis where I would wake in the night and you're just not thinking. The night time is not a good time to think about anything.
Right.
And the problem is your body's also going through all the physiological functions it goes through. So actually your heart's kind of, doing stuff and beating irregularly, and you know what it's like when you wake in the night and sometimes, you go to the loo and the heart's pounding or whatever. And so there were moments in those first few months after where I'd be like, I'd have genuine fear and I'd struggle to get back to sleep. Am I going to die? And then all those questions run through your mind of, what happens to my wife and kids, and all of that stuff. And you begin to do stupid things like picture your own funeral and picture the grief of your family and, picture the phone calls that have to happen and all that stuff. And no one talks to you. Again, that's why when you have these experiences, it's really nice to have someone who can walk you through those moments. But I didn't necessarily have that to start with and didn't know who to talk to and those kind of things. But I did begin to reach out to people and say, look, I'm having these moments of fear and will you pray for me? And I remember one particular guy praying for me just in a moment. I'd just been for an eye thing. One of the things that the heart condition can do apparently is it can affect your sight. And so when it's hospital, I didn't even know what the checks were. They drop these eyes in, which means your pupils dilate, you can't see. And then they were like, I said, sorry, what are we doing these tests for? And he said, we're just checking if you're going blind or not. And I'm like, what? And I'm like, and am I? They were like, no, we don't think so. I'm like, thanks for that. So I'm glad I didn't know that was what the tests were for. Right? Anyway, so then I have to get this train into Birmingham, and I'm like, I literally can't see. I'm like, all over the place. And then I come to this meeting and I explain what's been happening. And then at this meeting, someone prays for me. And they have this little word from God. Sometimes God speaks to people while they're praying for people. And they have this word about kind of Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. And talks about in Psalm 23, it talks about his rod and staff will comfort me. And as he said, just want to encourage you, when you're kind of having those moments, reach in your bed, reach for the staff. And actually, physically, since then, I have done the kind of reach for the, if someone saw me, it'd be a bit weird, like aerobics in bed or whatever. But things have really improved since then. And actually, I think, but also what's helped massively is thinking about eternity, thinking about what's happened with my family and God's goodness in comforting them. So knowing that when I die, whoever is left behind, God is still the father to the fatherless and defender of widows. And secondly, that I don't know what my future holds, but I know who holds my future. Because whatever happens, my dad is in heaven now. And I will go to heaven now. The absolute assurance, I haven't got it all together. I'm a sinful human being. But because of what Jesus done on the cross, in rising again, I have the absolute assurance that I go to heaven when I die. That's the best news in the world, isn't it? That is the good news of the gospel. And I suppose I cling to that like nothing else. And I think one of the reasons, actually, there's a real openness to faith at the moment in the world is because I think we're all a bit more aware of our mortality. And I think all of us have, the Bible says God has put eternity into the hearts of men. There's something about, we know that there's something beyond, deep down.
Yeah. Well, something's weird happened, hasn't it? Where I think there's moments in my life I can think of where my own mortality has become more present to me. The most scary one being when I was about 20, 21, and a not very close friend, but someone that was in my peer group at university, college, whatever you want to call it. I went to dance school, but it sounds immature, doesn't it? But I was
Sounds cool.
But I was at the university age, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And there was a guy who was trying to climb from one room to another at the YMCA building in London and fell 16 floors and died. And it just rocked my world. And I didn't know Jesus at the time.
Yeah.
And all I could dream about was what he was going through his mind when he died. like what happens when you die, where like just real dark
Weird.
thoughts.
Yeah.
Like, it was just sent me.
Not weird actually, not weird, because actually those, for those thoughts to come to you is because God's put eternity in your heart.
And I was grieving for him, and I was like, I don't even know this guy that well. I if I'm honest, I didn't think a lot of him. But he was just like really changed.
Right.
But with COVID, not only did it take a lot of our loved ones, right, but we all locked ourselves in a house so that we didn't die. I mean, that was the premise, right?
Yeah. Life preservation.
Yeah, stay indoors to stop the spread. Like so you don't die. Like it wasn't what the NHS said. I mean, that wasn't their slogan, but that is definitely how it was taken for a lot of people. And the people are going to write in and say you've misread the message. And no, I understood the messaging. Like protect the NHS. Let's all get it slowly. I didn't misread it, but there's a unconscious thing where we all became aware of our own mortality at the same time, and I think we're still dealing with the fallout from that. And I guess you and I have got something a bit different, so it just didn't bother me. What bothered me was, honestly, this is what I thought, think of all those people that might get COVID and die and they don't know Jesus. Yeah. I want them to know Jesus because I want them to go to heaven, and I'm not here to discuss who goes to heaven and who doesn't, but at least I want them to have the option to choose.
We can know the absolute assurance.
Yeah.
Of if you know Jesus.
Yeah.
You go to heaven when you die.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's something else in there, Phil, that comes so naturally to you that I don't know if you think about it, but like when your family has chosen to choose a Bible verse and let God speak to them and to minister you and heal to you in your grief, and when you find out you've got this life-changing condition that means your mortality is in front of your face every day. I have no idea how you deal with it. Well, I do, because Jesus, right? But what that requires is great faith. And where do you think that comes from? Because, it shines out of you. You read your Bible. You have family Bible verses. Like, I'm just like so jealous. I'm like, so cool. But what's inspiring is that faith, because the Bible passage about if you have a faith as small as a mustard seed, you can move a mountain, right? Well, yours faith isn't as small as a mustard seed. It's much larger than that. Why do you think that is? Why do you think you have such a good relationship with God, and great practices and intimacy with Him? Like, what can we learn from your relationship with God? I
mean, the first thing, as you talk about it, I don't feel like I've got it sorted. Do you know what I mean? I think it's, and I certainly feel every year I get better at that. I do feel kind of close to God. But I think, first of all, it's easy to look up to people and go, oh, they've got it sorted. And the reality is I haven't, but I'm really trying, and I get better. But I think you alluded to it actually in some of the things you said. I think the first thing is I've got and I'm getting better at disciplines, and I think that grows your faith. So if you're listening to this and you don't have a regular time every day with the Lord, I want to urge you to have one, because that does grow your faith. And Jesus is our model for that. He spent time on his own with his Father, got up early in the morning. It doesn't mean if you're not a morning person, find another time in the day to do it. But also looking back to the kind of the disciplines of my parents. So I would, and that a lot of those disciplines that I have now comes from seeing their example. They were great people of faith, so I kind of copied them. So actually, one of the things we do is we find people of faith and we copy what they do. So I'd come down in the mornings at home as a child and a teenager and find my parents reading their dog-eared, leather-bound Bibles. My dad, and people say you're too busy. My dad was a senior partner law firm on the leadership of the church, trustee of charities. He was ridiculously busy. And you know what? The best dad. He somehow managed to find this kind of balance in life. When people say I'm too busy, you make time for the things that are important to you. And so, I have.
If anyone says that, I say, can I see your screen time? because you have the app now that tells you your screen time and what you spend on everything.
Yeah, I'm sure.
No, because you don't have to have a leather dog-eared eating Bible, right?
Yeah.
You can have a Bible app. You can have. There's so much out there, on God TV, on all the other channels. Like there's so much content where you can meet God in a way that suits you. We absolutely have no excuse for not getting in His Word.
Yeah.
And finding somebody who we like and want to listen to. I don't buy that.
No. Anyway, but
sounds like the worst
let's not be
excuse.
judgmental. But
I'm not being judgmental.
I was.
I think I'm ministering to myself.
Right.
Let's get straight about this. I could spend more time with Jesus.
Yes, me too.
And here's a really funny thing, Phil. Right? So people, you don't need a prayer room. You don't need some fancy whatever. Like literally, this is how I meet God every day. It's really funny. It's really I'm really sharing something here, right? So I get out of the shower, and because I just have the time while I dry. I'm not like a dryer. I'm like a drip dry guy, right?
Yeah.
I put the towel over my head.
Yeah,
I look a bit like Mary, right? Yeah. But then I spend 20 minutes in prayer, sat on the end of my bed. It's weird. Yeah. It's weird. Like if anybody saw them, we were like, "What are you doing?"
I love that.
But I just feel warm, safe, and I spend 20, 30 minutes chatting to God, and it's, I might even, watch a word of encouragement or get my daily app reading, but it's always then, and it's just do what works for you,
Yeah. And so that, those disciplines of Bible, prayer, I think one of the things that, reflecting in terms of, we've talked a couple of times about the Bible verses, and I've quoted a couple. The reason I know those is because my dad, every morning on the way to school, from my kind of teenage years, would make me learn Bible verses before we could talk about the football. I really wanted to talk about the football, which meant I really learned the Bible verses. So it's absolutely true. We went through the whole of the Bible, all 66 books, and learnt a verse from every book of the Bible. So we would get in the car and we go, before we talk about football, it'd be right, Genesis 1 verse 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Exodus 3 verse 14, God said, I am who I am, this is what we say to the one who's called I am and sent me to you. We'd go through it all the way to Revelation. And you know what? It's the verses inside me that have saved me in the storms.
Yeah, come on.
So there was I was going through...
Say that again, more slowly.
It's the verses inside me that have saved me in the storms.
Wow.
So there was a moment at university, I was going through a really difficult time. And I remember screaming into the pillow in anguish one night. And I'm I was just really cut up about the situation. And the next morning I'm walking to lectures. It's a crisp, frosty February morning. And what comes to mind is the verse that I'd remembered from Lamentations when I was 14. Lamentations 3:23, which says, because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed. For his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness.
Amen.
And in that moment, genuinely, that verse saved me.
Yeah.
I'm on my way to lectures. The gloom lifted, and it was, I think one of the challenges you talk about the phones and the Bibles. The reason I actually love the physical copy is...
I knew you were a physical copy guy. I knew you were going to challenge me on this.
No. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with, my friend when he preaches says, if you've got a Bible, turn it on. But the thing about the physical copy is if you've got the Bible in your pocket all the time, you're less likely to memorise it.
Right.
I want to be continually memorising Scripture and let it get in my heart because I know I need it.
Yeah.
There's something powerful about it. And so in terms of how I have faith because I really love I've got a very high view of the Bible, try to read it every day. I'm not a great prayer, but I try to spend time each day kind of praying. And so this will shock some listeners and shock you possibly. I have structured prayer time through kind of liturgy. Right, yeah. I need the framework because I'm a bit I'm an activist and I'm full on. I actually really need sometimes the kind of the rhythm. So you can get various online and books of kind of liturgy which take you on a little journey through thankfulness and through the Psalms and then to a New Testament thing. And I need that structure. That's really helpful. But also, faith's a muscle.
That's the lawyer in you, I think.
Probably.
It's the Knox in you.
But faith is also a muscle that grows when you use it.
Yeah.
And so I think if you can have all the theoretical and the rhythms, and they're really important. I guess if we're talking, like a body, I'm just making this up as I go along here. That's one leg. The other leg is you've then got to put it into practice. And so things like, praying last night in the restaurant, taking a step out.
Yeah.
And as you grow more spiritually mature, almost the risks get higher, because it's a bit like when you're training for a marathon, right? You have to go a little bit further every time. And so you talk about in COVID, my faith risk during COVID was I ran basically because I was eating loads. I thought I could either run more or eat less. So
You ran more, yeah.
And as I'm running, I felt God just encouraged me to offer to pray for people in the street.
Right.
And so that was my faith. I didn't want to do it. I'd have conversations with God going, no, God, not today. I really don't want to. Really, do you know what I mean? I'd have a real wrestle. Sometimes I'd bottle it. So, so for people hearing this and thinking, you get this right, I don't get this right every time. Sometimes you bottle it. Sometimes it goes terribly. Spoke to this one guy who didn't speak English. That was a pretty short conversation. Yeah. I've been in a pub once and started chatting to a guy and, shared a bit of juice with him and he told me to F off. Sometimes it goes badly. But you know what? 90+% of the time. In fact, while I've been praying for people, while I've been running, I've lost count the number of times I've done it. Only two people have ever said no.
Yeah.
But that was my faith muscle.
I think that's my experience, like often we talk about evangelism, like how do I do it? And, there's loads of training out there, how to train. And I get that and I love that and it's really good. And for me, if you gave me a process, I'm going to mess it up. So I'm like, I just got to talk to people about Jesus, like who he is, what he's done in my life, pray for people. And I'm the same. I've never really had a bad experience. The fear that I have it's not from God, because and even people, if they say no, Phil, I've had a handful of people say, no, thank you, or I'm not interested. Like they don't like at least, here, because, we have to acknowledge that in some countries,
totally.
there's some severe persecution. The risk in the UK is pretty low.
Yeah.
And also you're going to get told to get stuff.
And if you're polite and British, it tends to be that other people are polite and British.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of, as I'm running, I'm aware that I'm a balding, sweaty bloke approaching someone. So I never approach women on their own. I never do it at night. I have a few little rules.
Right.
But sometimes, I'm prepared.
Yeah.
So actually I've worked on, because I'm nervous, I've worked on a little thing that I do where I say, really sorry to bother you. But I'm a Christian. As I run, I pray for people. Is there anything I can pray for you today? Often I'm kind of out of breath and I say it to. So I've had one guy go, say that again and slow down. But actually, you do it really gently, really nicely. People are very polite and British. Go, oh, that's nice. Yeah. But sometimes people go, what? Yeah. You want to do what? But actually, when you slow down into it, they go, oh, okay. A bit like last night. They kind of go, oh, I'll think about that.
And he did. And, for people listening at home, we went for tea together and there was a waiter and Phil asked him...
Umberto. Shout out to Umberto.
Imagine if Umberto watched this.
Yeah, come on.
Imagine if he gives his life to Christ and watched this. It'd be amazing. Come on, God. But Umberto was clearly had never been asked that in his life.
Yeah. So what I did, just to clarify, what I did was I said, we're Christians, we're about to say grace for the food. Is there anything we can pray for you today? So again, that's a rehearsed line. Yeah. I've copied it from someone else. Yeah. But now I tend to, when I'm out for lunch with people, that's what I'll do.
Yeah. And then Umberto says, he's like, oh, what? A bit awkward for a second, wasn't he? Yeah. He's like, well... Yeah, there are some real wants I have in my life.
He really thinks. Some people just go, nice life.
Yeah, but he really thought about it.
He really did, didn't he?
And he even said, I'd really like children, which felt really revealing. He was an older guy, maybe in his 50s, do we think, and late 40s, 50s, had decided in his head that he wasn't going to end up having children for whatever reason. But in his heart, God was saying something different. He just knew that. He couldn't express it. And he was like, oh, no, I don't. I think he thought it's silly to pray for that. And then I could see God sort of say to him, pray the impossible with these guys. Because he then did. And he came back full circle and said, yeah, no, actually, yeah. I'm going to go for the impossible. Pray for... Yeah.
So if you're listening to this in 2035 and you're one of Umberto's kids, we'd love you to.
Yeah. So, but what you don't realise in that is there's little things when you say we are Christians. I'm sat there going, oh yeah.
Reminded.
No, do you know, like because we get told where should we put our identity, and you know, your identity can slip, can't it, into, you know, whatever, and it's like, oh yeah, what does that mean?
Yeah,
you
don't forget that.
Yeah, but like, you know, when you say Christian, I think if I'd be like, oh, well, what does that mean? And you know, it's just really, really encouraging, Phil.
Yeah, but all to say, I think in terms of kind of, if you're out there and you're thinking, how do I grow my faith? I think, and I've just made this up during this podcast, but those two legs of...
It's good, it's your next book.
There you go, 2 legs
20%.
of the spiritual disciplines and spending time with Jesus.
Yeah.
And then faith, you know, and actually, and for you listening at home, you know, your faith might be pray for people in restaurants and in the street and on runs and in pubs or whatever, but it might be, you know, going to serve at your food bank, whatever, you know, there might be some other, whatever your gift is, actually stretching that kind of that uncomfortable comfort zone, getting out your comfort zone. Those are the moments. And the challenge is actually for me, last night wasn't awkward because actually I've done it so many times. So I have to find other ways now to stretch my faith in other ways. You know.
No, it wasn't awkward at all. And that's the thing. I think that's the biggest encouragement is...
It was to start with. It felt awkward to start with.
There's 2 of us that are both evangelists. I must have spoken to thousands of people, Phil. You know, taxi drivers, train ticket officers, like, you know, I'm just thinking of like the really good ones. Yeah. But you know, and we've had very minimal bad experiences. There's been a couple, but not terrible, nothing that you can't shake off, and you know, God's got you in those moments. But it's just really an encouragement of like, oh, it's really doable and easy. And if it's not for you to do it in that way, fine, don't find your own way. But it is important that we do that, and it's going to grow your faith. Yeah.
And I've also had some well funny ones.
Yeah.
So like I had this one work guy where, you know, I was running around my community and this guy, like, you know, 7:30 in the morning, guy swigging a lager can, do you know what I mean? And then, you know, him and his got a girlfriend there. So I'm like, and again, the Holy Spirit, you know, I felt God go, just go and have a chat with him, you know. So kind of, you know, so did the thing, and he's like, he's blown away. He's like, wow. You know, maybe the lager, you know, and so then I kind of pray for him. And then he says, can I pray for you? And I'm like, yep. And what came out of his mouth was hardly the Book of Common Prayer, let's say. But I ran away going, Lord, that's so funny. Do you know what I mean? You know, really, so I kind of really laughed about that. And there was an amazing moment actually where me and my mate were both running together, because, you know, evangelism's a team game, you know, often. And so me and my mate were both running. He was a Christian, and we kind of came across this guy who was bent over double, he was backwards in serious pain, and we prayed for him. We basically kind of did the thing, chatted to him, prayed that his back, he didn't, but then we were able to give him a lift back to his flat, and his flat needed a bit of work, let's say. My best mate's a builder, and so we then, because he had a bad back, we went shopping for him the next day, got him some food and stuff, and kind of got him sorted. But then we also kind of said, like, you know, because you got your back, do you mind if we kind of help kind of tidy up your flat a bit? And it really did need some work, and we developed this relationship with this guy Mick, who was an absolute legend, and had some great conversations about faith, and got to be a real blessing there. You know, sometimes you never know where these little God moments will come, and I wholeheartedly believe, you know, some are possibly my imagination when I hear God's Spirit go talk to him, but that guy Mick and a few others over the years have been like, boom, do you know what I mean? God has really had his hand, you know, on those encounters.
Yeah. It's so good. I want to share one of mine as well, because it's like it sort of goes into not only what God does when you do evangelize, but also like how God speaks to us sometimes. Because people, you know, partly how's God going to speak to you if your Bible's shut, which goes back to, you know, reading your Bible and having scriptures that save you, like, because you already know them. You know, you're not like, oh, I need a scripture for this, Jesus, like it's already in you. But in the early days of God TV, when we were doing events, obviously before COVID, right? I like needed a lot of encouragement, because it's not my comfort zone. I'd much rather this, like, deep relationship, intimate, not lots of people, and like God was really stretching me in like my evangelism and a bit of prophetic speaking, and that was weird, and I was like, I've been a bit critical of it in the past, and so God was really healing me around that and taking me on a journey. But the thing that God would always do is, before every event, I'd meet somebody who I either didn't know or knew really well, but I didn't know that they would have watched God TV, right? So, for one example, in Manchester, I'm stood at the back of a hall talking to a guy, Graham, that I've known for 5 years, worked with him at the Message Trust and all this stuff. And he goes, "Oh, I love God TV. I watch it every morning when I go on my treadmill." And I'm like, "Graham, I've known you for ages, and you've not told me that, that God TV really speaks into your life in this way." And he'd always encouraged me about the mission of God TV before I had to speak about the mission of God TV. And almost it was like, great, because then you go, well, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm just going to get my friend Graham up. Do you know what I mean? And I could get someone else to talk about their testimony of how God uses media, really, right? Because that's what I'm there to talk about. And then we're going to this event in Edinburgh. It's January. It's raining. It's horrible. I'm with Fergus, and we're getting in this car. It's freezing, and we're going to this church. And I can't remember why, but we didn't have like a big turnout, And even though that doesn't matter in your head, you're like, is anyone going to be there? Loads of doubt. And I was like, I turned to Fergus before we got in this cab, and I said, Fergus, God hasn't brought someone to me today. Like, he always brings somebody to encourage me, and we're going to be at the church in 10 minutes in this cab. So we get in the cab, and he's like an Asian, I think he was from India or Sri Lanka, or from Asia somewhere. Taxi driver, we get in, and he's like, "Oh, where are you going?" "Oh, we're going to the church." And he's like, "Oh, what are you going to church for?" And we say, "Oh, we're from..."
Here we go.
We're from God TV. No, I wasn't thinking that. I was like, "Oh, we're from God TV. We're doing this event about like how God TV, reaches people across the world." And he goes, "God TV? God TV?" He said, "I got saved watching God TV in India 15 years ago, and now I live in the UK." And I'm like, come on, God. Do you know?
Love it.
And for me, it's like I had lost in that moment all my courage, all my faith. I wasn't evangelizing. I wasn't finding, and yet God was able to minister to me like through his testimony.
Right, mate.
And I just want to encourage everyone at home, I don't think there's such a thing as a coincidence, and when you see patterns, that's God working in your life.
Yeah.
We were talking about evangelism, but you quite nicely sort of touched on, I guess, helping the poor and living in a poor area, and also friendship. And we said we'd talk about both. Talk to me about the poor, because I'm really interested in this. In a lot of us in the West have very comfortable lives. So you have a bit of a challenge, I guess, around comfort and what that might mean to us as Christians. So brace yourself, guys.
I'm not allowed to know.
Because if you're comfortable, you might not like what Phil's about to say, but I'd like you to just share, your theory on comfort.
Yeah, I think first of all, theologically, God has a bias towards the poor. You can't read Scripture without realising that God's heart is for the last, the least, and the lost. And wealth is not sinful in itself.
Blessed are the poor in spirit.
But is a trap. So you look at the stuff that Jesus says. Jesus says more about money than almost anything else. And money is really dangerous. The love of money is the root of all evil. Not money itself, the love of money is the root of all evil. And I guess, first of all, being part of my story, kind of having lived in a, as I said, my dad we could have lived in any house in Birmingham, but we felt particularly called. We live on a beautiful estate in Birmingham, not in the world's eyes, but in God's eyes. We're top 2% of deprivation in the country in our parish. When my parents moved there, a lot of people were really critical of my parents for moving to a council estate, saying, what will it mean for your kids' education and stuff. First of all, on that, God has been outrageously good. So my parents sent me to the local kind of council estate school. Then my brother and sister went to the local comprehensive. I was, at the time, a bit cleverer, so I went to the grammar school. But my brother and sister actually far exceeded my education levels. My brother is now a doctor in chemistry. My sister's got a first-class degree in education. Great. I did all right with a law degree. But all to say, God's favour in those moments, actually, my parents took a real step of faith actually God really honoured our education didn't suffer at all with being there. I think God honours that. But I think we idolise wealth in the world, certainly, and sometimes in the church. And I think we just need to be aware of that, because God has a bias towards the poor and calls us to be generous. And also, I think there's something about, in terms of the comfort thing, where 100, 200 years ago, people didn't even have toilets in the house. People, we don't know, in some extent, in terms of the swathes of human history, we are so outrageously comfortable. If you have running water, if you have central heating, if you have a toilet in your house, you are in such the top, single percentile figures within the world. And I think sometimes we can moan, and it's all relative. But certainly, I think sometimes that comfort leads to being the enemy of some of that faith and growth that we've talked about today. And I think my other kind of recent reflection has been...
So comfort is the enemy of growth?
Yes, because we get comfortable.
Right.
And we don't move on. That's spiritually, but also physical comfort.
Yeah.
And we aspire to comfort, don't we? So we aspire towards physical comfort. We want to be physically comfortable. I came across a sleeping bag suit the other day, and, everything's marketed as the most comfortable mattress and sofa. Physical comfort is huge in our society. Then you've got financial comfort. So there's this kind of idea that you can have savings and financial. And again, I'm not against good financial stewardship, but I am saying that the world tells us get as financially comfortable as possible. Whereas Jesus just seems to communicate something different around that's not the goal in life. That's a good thing to have sometimes, but that's not our goal in life. Our goal in life is not financial comfort, and so that, I think so. Whereas sometimes that can become more important than becoming more like Jesus. Then what about social comfort, right? So I've heard friends say, I don't like hanging out with them because they're a bit awkward, right? So sometimes we pursue social comfort. So we don't get to know people who are different from us. We don't get to know people of different worldviews because we want to be socially comfortable. So I think we just got to be aware that the enemy gets in with comfort. And I think especially for me, as I said, I'm in my late 30s. If I look at the ways in which the enemy has tried to trip me up through my years, right? So when I was a kind of child, it was probably being naughty and rebelling against my parents, right? Then you get to your teenage years. Do you know what I struggle with as a kind of, certainly my teenage years? Swearing, right? So that was the kind of thing. If I could get through a day without swearing at school, that was a good day, and then you couldn't use lecture, it's kind of things like lust and pornography. Those you kind of, as you get through that, then you kind of, when I was at university, it was going out and getting drunk. It was wanting to kind of go out with non-Christians and have sex. Those were the kind of temptations in my kind of early 20s. Then probably as you get into your kind of late 20s, early 30s, it becomes things like ambition and wanting to kind of compare yourself with other people as you begin to kind of climb the career ladder. But then I'd say as I've gone through my 30s, as I've begun to become more and more financially independent, and as I've got to a certain stage in my spiritual maturity, the big enemy to my growth is comfort. That's the big temptation. Now, actually, do you know what? I'm not tempted to go out and have sex with someone who's not my wife. I'm not tempted to go out and get absolutely bladdered. I'm not tempted in the same way, but I am really tempted to trust in money, to be really greedy, to not be generous, to hoard. That's the way the enemy's tempting me at the moment. And I think we're in real danger as I look at the church at the moment, the world, especially in a kind of, I know people are listening to this in all backgrounds all around the world, but my world is often spent with comfortable middle-aged Christians. And I've got friends who've given up on church because it's a bit awkward and it's a bit too much effort to go on a Sunday. And that breaks my heart. Honestly, I'm like, people who are on fire for Jesus in their 20s, now not going to church. And as I talk to pastors, so my job for the Evangelical Alliance is preaching in churches almost every weekend. As I seek to encourage pastors, often people go in, well, I've kind of not coming to church anymore. And so, do you know what? Sometimes you don't have to go to church to be a Christian. You have to be in community to be a Christian. But you there's something about kind of people going, well, actually, my kids go to football on a Sunday. If you're listening to this and you're prioritising your children's football over over church. I want to urge you, your kid is unlikely to play for England, but your kid might have a chance of following Jesus into their 20s and they're young adulthood. Stop going to football on Sunday, take them to church, Commit. My parents taught me loads about this. So we'd go to holiday to Scotland, back where my grandfather became a Christian.
Just before we carry on, though, but my challenge to that is, why does church have to be on a Sunday morning? Why can't church get more flexible? What is church? Because there'll be people at home going...
It depends on your heart.
Look, my son loves football.
Yeah, it depends on your heart. Depends on your heart. If your heart is... if you find another expression of community, then fine. But if your heart is, I'm prioritising the happiness and well-being of my son or daughter over the importance of being part of a Sunday community. Now, whatever your theology of church, of course you can do.
That's so challenging.
Of course you can do community outside of Sunday. But when is the moment let's be frank, when is the moment most churches in the West gather? It's on a Sunday. So it is about our heart. And if before God, you feel it's the right thing to do that, then who am I to judge you and argue? And I hear this in the spirit it's meant. Yeah. The spirit it's meant is the idolatry of the nice, comfortable, middle-class, middle-aged life is the enemy to your growth.
Right.
And church, just because church isn't meeting your needs, isn't a reason not to go. So my parents would say that when Jesus went to the synagogue, it probably wasn't scratching where he was itching, but he went because it was important to be part of an intergenerational family, to meet together and to meet with his dad. I know because I go to churches across the UK. I don't get what I want when I go to church. If I was to come up with a song list, it wouldn't be what I get when I go to church. If I was to come up with a sermon, it wouldn't be necessary. We are so consumeristic about this. And let's not be pharisaical and legalistic about kind of, and doing it because it somehow might make God happy. Our heart has to be first and foremost, love God first with everything you have. That's the greatest command.
Yeah.
And if you are loving the idea that your son might be good at football or the social thing or whatever it is above the Lord, then my prayer is that the Spirit works in you and urges you to reconsider. We would go on holiday to Scotland as a family. When I was a teenager, we'd sit through what I would consider at the time as a 15-year-old to be the world's most boring service. I mean, to be honest, I didn't get the sermon, felt like it went on for hours. The prayers were awful. The hymns were sung at 3 miles an hour. It was horrific, in my opinion, as a 15-year-old. We went.
Yeah.
And I learned, and my dad said, okay, all right, mate, my challenge to you, take your notepad and write, take notes from the sermon. I didn't get what I wanted. Loads of us don't get when we go to church, but it taught me a discipline of being part of that moment and just saying, even if the preaching was terrible or whatever, God can still speak. Our heart has to be God first. And just, I think for all of us to regularly do a heart check, pray that prayer of the psalmist, Lord, search me and know my heart. If there's any idols, but for me, as I observe culture in the UK at the moment, many of us are saying, do you know what, church, even if I go twice a month, that's all right, isn't it? It's all right. And do you know what, if my football team are playing, then I'll watch that. If we've got friends over for the weekend, so we won't go. I think there's something about faith. We're back to how we have faith. There's something about faith where there's a cost.
Yeah.
And sometimes there is a cost to go to church, even if it's not what we want. And there's a cost to being to going to church with a hunger to say, God, would you speak to me today, even though I might not agree with it from business, or like the songs or whatever. There's also a cost to relationship with awkward people. So sometimes when we go to church, do we only spend time afterwards over coffee with the people we like and who we can have a conversation about the football yesterday, or do we get to know people who are different, of different ages and backgrounds and stories, and look out for the outsider and play that out? I guess that's a gentle challenge. If you're hearing this and you feel judged, I'm sorry. Maybe the Spirit's having a little niggle. But my encouragement to you is put Jesus first. Yeah. And sometimes that means going to church when you don't want to.
Yeah, I think that's what I hear. And maybe because I know you a little bit, your heart is not to judge anyone. But it is about, like, if your goal is not God, if your identity is not God, if you're loving anything that's not God, whether that's, money, football, whatever, it's okay to enjoy those things. It's okay to do church differently, but actually the challenge is examine the heart, and like look at that. I think it is really challenging. Like it's going to challenge everybody out there, and I don't want to soften the message, but write in the comments. It's just be great for Phil and I to look at it and learn and grow with all of you at home. So if people feel challenged by it, get in the comments and let us know. And if they disagree with something you said, I mean, we have to live in a Christian community where what we say can be challenged. So we're good with that, right?
Yeah. And the final thing to just say on the community thing is think of it from the pastor's perspective. So I spend so much time with church leaders. It's really difficult leading a church. And pastors put a load of effort into creating something, for a Sunday or whenever. But if you're part of a church, don't miss the moment to even encourage the pastor just by being there. We bring something. When we go to our house group on a Thursday night or church on a Sunday, we bring something that only we can bring. And it's a great encouragement. When I go to turn up at churches, the pastor's often watching people coming in, and his eyes light up as different people come or her. Their eyes light up as people come down the driveway. Don't miss that opportunity to be part of something, bring encouragement, even if it's not your cup of tea.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, God's going to meet you wherever you go, and so give it a try, I guess. That sounded really dismissive. I wasn't being dismissive, but we're running out of time, and we've still got the key thing to talk about is friendship. You've brought a new book out called The Best of Friends. We made a cool video for you, so that was awesome and fun. And you've done
so cool.
You've done loads of interviews, not just on God TV, but on BBC and Talk TV, and seems it's kept you very busy, and it's been awesome to just watch you sort of flourish on this subject of friendship. But what's the book about, Phil? What's this thing that God's put on your heart about friendship?
Yeah, well, it came originally from a place of real pain. So at the pandemic, obviously, loads of people had a terrible time in 2020. But for me, a couple of things happened. First of all, I launched my first book, which is called Story Bearer: How to Share Your Faith with Your Friends, which is a bit of a kind of how all of us can share our story with those around us. That came out the week the bookshops closed. So with the first week of lockdown, launch parties were cancelled. I had a moment where I was buying all the wine for the launch party, and I got the call halfway around the supermarket saying that the launch party was cancelled. So everyone else is buying toilet roll. It was that time. I've got a trolley full of champagne, and I look like I'm preparing for the apocalypse in a slightly different way. But I remember getting home and pulling the duvet over my head and going, Lord, this isn't happening. You pour yourself for 2, 3, 4 years into something, and then it's cancelled. I was so discouraged, so disappointed. And then a few weeks later, we found out that my mum, who's been battling cancer for about 6 months, we find out that cancer's terminal. So as lockdown starts, all those memories of seeing people, I sat every day at the end of my mum's driveway for a couple of hours, and with my then kind of 1-year-old, 2-year-old, and watched her physically deteriorate. Terrible. So, and then she eventually died on the 8th of June 2020, and so all that stuff we talked about, grief, how that second wave of my second parent dying came then. 2 things got me through that terrible season: faith and friendship. I really remember who was there for me. So all those moments we talked about earlier, people going for walks, my kitchen looked like a florist, my living room looked like Clinton's cards, people were just so beautiful and generous. We didn't cook for 3 months. Friends were amazing. And I felt compelled to really investigate it. The other thing is, I also didn't enter the conversation with the purest of motives, because I'm an evangelist. The way most people become Christians, the most significant human relationship is a friend. And yet, we also did some research as the Evangelical Alliance into why Christians didn't share their faith with their friends. Number one reason, lack of relationship with not yet Christians. So I thought, could I write a book that encouraged us to be brilliant friends, so that in 10, 20 years' time, more people become Christians? Now, what happened then, as I researched friendship for the best part of 2 years, I just fell in love with it. I read everything I could find. I talked to anyone who would talk to me and listen, and I just fell in love with how good friendship is. And what I've discovered is that the sages, the sociologists, the scientists and the scriptures all agree it is not good for us to be alone. God says at the beginning of the Bible, 8 things are good or very good. First thing that's not good, it's not good for us to be alone. And, you look all the way through Scripture, we are relationally wired for relationship with God, but also with each other. We fall into this individualistic lie because of the world that you can do life on your own, you can do discipleship on your own. It's just not true. We need others. And so scientifically as well, the power of friendship is utterly astonishing. You can be really unhealthy, and yet if you've got good friends, you'll live longer than someone who's socially isolated, yet keeps himself in shape. And so friendship is so good. It really is one of God's greatest gifts to us. So I fell in love with it, but then I began to look up, if friendship's so good, why are we facing the challenges we are, right? So 1 in 3 men say they have no close friends, not much better for women. 40% of young adults, the most connected generation in history, say they always often feel lonely. How on earth have we got to a place in the UK? We've got a minister for loneliness in the government. What's going on? So I began to look at the cultural pressures around friendship, and the forces are not in our favour. So began to unpick some of that, and actually found in Scripture some beautiful lessons to be learned throughout Scripture, but especially from Jesus. And Jesus has got some wonderful things to talk to us about when it comes to friendship. One of those being, we have limited relational capacity. We are finite people. The challenge is, we live in a world that says you can have it all. We just can't.
Yeah.
Can't be friends with everyone. So there's amazing science, right? So I looked into the science, amazing anthropologist called Robin Dunbar, leading friendship expert. He found you can have about 150 friends. That's what you're capable of. Not 2,000 Facebook connections, 150 friends. That's how big your brain is.
I'm even amazed by that.
No, okay,
I mean,
well, there you go.
if I had 5, it'd be great.
And these aren't great friends. These are people who you might be in a departure lounge at an airport.
All right, so like good relationships.
Right,
with like
people,
Yeah.
So if you're at a train station,
Well, I consider everyone at God TV my friend.
Yeah, there you go.
You know.
It's that. Well, that okay. Maybe that kind of relationship.
We have a place where we have to meet. We have something to do together.
Right. You walk into a coffee shop later on your own to read a book, and you see someone, and you know where you stand in terms of them, and they know where they stand in terms of you. That's we've got 100 capacity for 150 of those.
Right.
Then he said, this anthropologist, what about good friends? How many good friends can you have? The answer's about 12. Then he said, what about great friends? How many of those can you have? About 3. And as I'm reading this, I'm like, that sounds really familiar.
Yeah, 12 and 3.
Right. So I'm like, that sounds really familiar. And it turns out that the Son of God, 2,000 years ago, when he's looking at when he constructs his relational structures, the latest science of 2023 agrees with Jesus in AD 1, right? Like AD 33. It's as if he had help, right? And then I reckon, this is a bit of Phil Knox logic, but you add Jesus, Luke 10 says Jesus had 72 people. You throw in the women, the 12, the rest. I reckon you probably get to about 150. And actually, then what's really interesting, you can have one best friend. And John writes, he was the disciple Jesus loved. Now, if I was writing a letter about Jesus, I'd probably say I was the disciple Jesus loved. But the rest of the evidence will back up Jesus was closer with John than anybody else. He's the one, as Jesus died on the cross, he's the one who says to his mother, "This is your son." He really trusts John. So what Jesus has to teach us is, and I guess what my first message around friendship is, invest your energy disproportionately in a few people. As I've researched the book, I've met loads of people, Christians and non-Christians, who said, you know what, I've got loads of mates. I'm not sure I've got many really good friends.
Yeah.
Quantity is no substitute for quality.
What do you mean by a good friend?
Someone who you're really vulnerable with, someone who you spend a disproportionate amount of time with, someone who you can call at 3 o'clock in the morning when the proverbial hits the fan, someone who will love you despite knowing your deepest failings, someone who is the first person you call when something good happens, someone who knows your history, past, guilt, shame, and loves you anyway. There's something about friendship which is, and probably these things take time as well. So actually, if I think about, I've talked a bit about my best friend being there for me when my dad died. We're still best mates. When I get things seriously wrong, I can tell Adam, and he won't judge me, loves me. And if something horrendous happened in life. I could sit and cry, and Adam won't mind me saying this, but his sister died in the summer. And you journey through that moment, and you're like, there's something about that depth of friendship I think that we need, but yet we are in friendship poverty. We're in a loneliness epidemic.
Why do you think that is?
I think the winds of culture are blowing in our face. So
what does that mean?
So our culture says it's all about you. We are so selfish and individualistic that that's partly our fault because we're sinful human beings, but partly it's in my pocket I've got an iPhone, we've got iPads, everything it's so individualistic, and even on you that the whole when you wake up in the morning, the story society is telling is that of individualism. When you turn on the news, it's about you and your personal happiness. That friendship is the gift that we give, not just the gift that we receive. So there's first of all something in culture. Work's changed.
Well, it's interesting. The scripture, love your neighbour as yourself.
Yeah.
God says that because he already knows that we love ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And there's people out there that won't, but that's the minority, and then we're sort of flipping that and saying, well, we have to be really good at loving ourselves because how can we love other people?
Yeah.
Because if we're not great at that, but that's wrong. That message isn't about love yourself more. Like, love your neighbour as yourself is. God thinks you already love yourself enough.
Yeah, and moreover,
shift your focus.
And moreover, Jesus is about to go to the cross, says, there's no greater love than they that lay their life down for who? For their friends.
Right.
So there's something about sacrifice at the heart of friendship, which we just need to rediscover as a world. And so there's a bit of that. Work's changed.
Yeah.
So we're not working as many hours as we did 100 years ago.
I mean, speak for yourself, but
but more of us are working in households, and the nature of work's changed.
Right.
So we're not. Me and my family went to the Black Country Museum recently, and look, you get to go underground into the coal mines.
Right.
And my son turns to me and says, "Daddy, I'm so glad this isn't what we have to do now."
Right.
People who did that worked so many hours a day and so many days a week. In the winter, they only saw sunlight one day a week. So we're not working as many hours. But you know what? The nature of work's changed. So we think for a living. People like you and me, Ian, we think for a living. And the problem with that is, or the challenge with that is, or the downside of that, is we're not digging in a coal pit all day, but we're using the same muscles at work to create, to answer emails, to write, to speak, to be on Zoom meetings, as we do to make friends.
Right.
So we're much tireder emotionally and relationally when we get back. So my best mate, Ants, is a builder. He digs all day. He gets back at 5 o'clock in the evening. He's ready for friendship.
Yeah,
he's been primarily using his body,
yeah.
whereas I've been primarily using my brain. And so I often, at the end of the day, I'm sure you're the same, just want to crash in front of the TV or a screen and receive what the screen has to offer me, rather than kind of be friends. So that's another cultural water that is not where we're kind of going against the tide with that. And we are watching screens more as well. So there is something of, the amount of time, you said earlier, the biggest distraction, we are scrolling more, and that's more individualistic than friendships. All of that to say, all of that combines with our own selfishness, and the enemy does not want our friendships to thrive. All of that means it's a battle. And
so what's the antidote then? What we're supposed to do about it?
Yeah, I think the antidote is, first of all, this is two things I think Jesus teaches about friendship. So first of all, find a few people who you disproportionately spend your time with. And with those people, I guess my 3 bits of advice that I found as I've researched what great friendship looks like are time, presence, and vulnerability. So make the effort to spend a bit more time with a few people than you would with your wider network. Then be with them, if possible, physically. I think we've all found Zoom is a terrible substitute for real friendship. But thirdly, don't just talk about what you did at the weekend, what reality TV show you're watching. Actually, there's something about vulnerability. So even in this conversation, the reason that it feels like, doesn't it, we're really connecting today.
I've been really purposeful about not doing it. There are so many great people that have said they want to be on the podcast, right? But they want to do it via Zoom or whatever.
Yeah.
And I've really held that boundary because there is something different. I'll ask different questions. I can see your body language. I'm not trying to read it. You just do, I can see when your eyes glass up.
Yeah. But on the vulnerability point, the fact that, today we've talked about struggles, grief, bereavement, that takes, regardless of people listening, that takes our friendship to another level because we've been honest with each other. And I think the challenge is so often, I have got some friends who I've known for decades who I've only a couple of times really gone to any kind of depth with. Yeah. And my relationship just isn't as deep. So I think in terms of how we grow those friendships, there's a moment where you kind of take a deep breath and you say, when they say, how you doing? I'm really struggling. Yeah. And, I'm really thinking about this. Can we talk about this? That, if you're looking for a way to deepen your friendship, there's no substitute.
Well, let me share you my challenge with friendships. I'm really blessed. I have a best friend. We were friends since school. Wow. Our relationship has been close in a way, and closer as our lives have gone on. And, just recently that friendship has become really close again because his daughter's grown up, and we've both realised we need to invest the time, and we've both taken up golf together. So actually, we've got new shared experience because we would just talk about what we did when we were 18, never had nothing else to talk about. Yeah. And that was very northern of me, nothing else, anything else to talk about. But friendship's been a real thing for me since I moved to Plymouth because I'm of an age, I'm 38 now, so I was 34. Is that right? 34, 35, 36, 37, 38. No, I was 33 when I moved to Plymouth, 32, 33. And the most difficult thing about making new friends is other people have got friends, or they're in the throes of family, or, they've got work, church.
And it takes time.
Yeah, and everything. And I have really specifically spent a lot of time trying to commit time with very specific men. Well done. But it's not worked out to anything, So I still have our best friend and lots of people that I could go for dinner with or bump into in the street and have a nice chat with. Yeah. But I've never built those deep and intimate relationships. I don't feel loads of pain about that, but I know I've been really specific about it. So what would you suggest? And I know you're not like this guru, but you've written about it. So I'm really like, well, how do we find new friends, and how do we discern who we should invest in? Because, what if I invest in someone and then it's just terrible, like we're not alike, and, or they hurt me or whatever, like, because I know there's risk in this. So talk to me about what you found about, like, how do we make new relationships, and how do we discern who we should invest the time with? Yeah,
I think there's a couple of bits of advice I'd give. I think the first is, and I think we really don't talk about this enough, we don't pray as much as we should do for our friends. I really believe God is the great connector. So at the cross, Jesus dying for the sins of the world, and yet he connects John to his mother. Jesus is the great connector. He is I imagine him kind of, pulling strings, almost like sometimes where, probably where you and me, God knew before we were friends. He goes, they're going to really get on. Do you know what I mean? He says to one of the angels, honestly, you wait. And I think so. God is a great connector. And we don't pray enough to say, Lord, would you, and a bit like you did with that day in the taxi, Lord, would you connect me with someone today? And I think so. So there's something about that. The second thing is, as I'd say, who's under your nose? So who are the people already in your life who you see on the school run, or you sit next to at work and stuff? And then, as you've experienced and just shared a little, there's a bit of trial and error. Sometimes there are moments that there's what some sociologists talk about the stretch. So friends have to stretch together, and like when you do exercise and you have to stretch your muscles, you gradually get to a point where you become more supple. Well, I think friendships are sometimes like that. So sometimes, you might be you might kind of, like we did last night, go out for dinner, and you asked me, what can I really pray for in your life, Phil, and I might, if I just put really superficial answer, and you then really pour out your heart, then you're stretching further than me, and you maybe have to give it a couple of times before you get to a point where I stretch with you. And if I don't stretch with you, that might be the kind of ceiling of that friendship. Yeah. And there's something about when you, but so you do have to try with a number of people sometimes and be intentional and say, can we go and grab dinner? Can we go and grab a round of golf together? Yeah. Find stuff that you like doing. So, and also work out how people relate. So my best mate he doesn't go for coffee much, but given the opportunity to weight train or run or something together, that's how we connect. And a bit like you with golf. Some people, however, it will be going. So we do have to kind of, work out what are the best ways we're going to build those relationships. But also there is a bit of trial and error.
But do you think distance is a thing? Because I think I haven't struggled having depth with like new men in my life.
Yeah.
Like I can probably name 3 or 4 people where we've had really vulnerable conversations, and I think I could probably even call them right now today and say, I need help with this.
Yeah.
But just life, just like, they live an hour and 40 minutes away, and or they've moved, or their job's changed, or like I've got really close to thinking, I've found a great friend that I can spend some time with. And for me, I don't care if it's golf or whatever, I'll go for a coffee. I feel like really open, because to me, what I'm asking God for is depth of connection. Like, I care about Phil and his heart, and I want to know about his family, and I do want to pray for you. And then you're going to go back to Birmingham and I'll not talk to you for 3 months. That's just... But still feel really fondly of you. And like, I can't change where you live and the job you do and the friends you've already got. So, like, what do you think about that?
Well, the experts, there's there's research into all the kinds of this stuff.
Cool, I'm learning.
And I've done the research.
Learning.
If you want to dive into the research, buy the book, have a look at it. But one of the key bits of research is...
Slick that. That's slick.
Thanks, mate. There's something called the 30-minute rule.
Right.
Where you are... if you have to go further than 30 minutes or live further than 30 minutes away from someone, you are way less likely to spend that time with that person. There's even research into how many hours you need to spend time with the different layers of friendship. So I think it's about 60 hours you need with someone to kind of have to be in that kind of that 150. It takes about 60 hours to become to be that right inner circle of a best friend. Probably with your best friend, you well exceeded this. About 340 hours with that person. So there's research into kind of, obviously friendships are an art, not a formula.
Right.
People have done the research to say, generally, in broad brushstrokes, as humanity, those are the kind of rules. There are also really interesting things around when you're going to be leaving an area. So if we're in Plymouth, where I guess a lot of people come to kind of part of the armed forces. If they know that they're going to move on in the next 5 years, which I guess many of them will do because of deployment or whatever, they are 20 to 25% less likely to join a club, to join a religious community, all of those things. And so I think being aware of some of those things really helps. And so even kind of with who you're kind of beginning to choose, and when we're making friends, finding those people who actually you're probably going to be in the same area for a while. That's
grow where you're planted.
Probably sensible. And sometimes, and I think one of the challenges we face, we're so transient as a society. And that's relatively new. Whole of human history, most people have generally stayed where they are. And interestingly, where I live, on the council estate where I live, a lot of people have been there for generations. And that actually lends itself to deeper relationship. And sometimes the most significant thing we can do is stay. So for me, I love my community, but the biggest reason I think God's calling me to stay is it's not even necessarily the community, it's my friends. Because I've seen friends also who've moved for work or for marriage or whatever. It's so difficult, especially the older you get in life. I think it's every 7 years the number of friends you have halves, something like that. And all those kind of those relationships, and that's probably been true for me gradually as I've been through my 20s and 30s. But friendship really requires effort. There's a cost to it, but it's so important. It's so valuable that it's worth our time. It's worth the cost. It's worth the vulnerability. It's worth the risk. We have to work out. It's worth the conflict. Sometimes we have to go through conflict. Our friends let us down. For every Andrew and Peter you have a Judas and a Thomas. Our friends do let us down. We do need to, but it's worth the investment because as I've experienced the grief in my life, I've needed friends with me. When I celebrate stuff in life, I don't want to splash it on my Facebook wall before I call my closest friends.
Right.
We need relationship. We need one another. We need friends.
Good. I think it's a good place to stop, Phil. I don't know if you've got a final takeaway, but I mean, how do I string all this together? I guess, it's
covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, and it's great. And we've run out of time, and I could talk to you for another hour and a half. I don't know if people at home would withstand that. But if I'm to wrap it up, I kind of feel like you've been through some incredibly tough situations and dealt with and are dealing with grief. And so our encouragement to everyone who's at home is like, stick to God, you know, find God in that grief, and, you know, he will see you through. We've talked about the importance of friendship. I just want to say it's nice to be new friends.
Come on.
And you've encouraged me this last few days, and, you know, like, so thank you for that. And we encourage everyone at home to go out on a limb for friendship. And you've really challenged us around comfort. So, I mean, like, if you're at home and you're feeling super comfortable and, you know, your goal is not God, your identity isn't God, and you're not loving the right things, I mean, maybe that's what's making you unhappy, and we just encourage you to give your life back to Christ today. So just before I close, and I thank everybody who's helped us do this today, if you've got like a closing thought, or, you know, something you want to say to people at home.
Nothing like being put on the spot. I think my deepest encouragement is put God first, and you can't do it on your own. You know, I think that you know, make the main thing the main thing, and the main thing is following Jesus with everything you have, and loving your neighbour as yourself.
Yeah.
And there's a reason Jesus says that all the law and prophets hold on those two things. You know, keep that simple, and also know that life is not easy, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, the Bible encourages.
It's what we're promised.
Yeah, and the Bible encourages that's how we grow. So in terms of kind of, you know, the Bible verse, maybe to pull together grief and comfort together, is in Romans 5. It says that it's suffering that produces perseverance, character, and character hope. If you want to be a person of character, a person of hope, we need to go through those sufferings, but we do so together.
Good. Thanks, Phil. It's a great place to finish. So, you know, I just want to thank Richard, Dimitri and Trevor, who are doing this in the other room, Noah, who is helping us produce the podcast, and finally, Phil, just thank you very much to you. You know, thank you for your time. Thank you for coming down here. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. I want to encourage everyone at home, you know, go and check out Phil's socials. We'll put them in the links, and also check out his new book, The Best of Friends. It's going to help Phil if you buy it. So, like, if you all go buy it, that's great. But also, you know what to do. Like, subscribe. You know, I don't know a creative way of sort of saying that anymore. But if you do, helps the YouTube algorithm, helps us continue to get, you know, more guests. And actually, if you're feeling a bit evangelistic, the more you like it, the more you share it, the more people are going to hear about God today, because it's going to turn up on their YouTube feed. So, you know, be evangelistic, support us in what we're doing, and, you know, get in the comments and tell us who else you want to see, what you want to hear, what you think we've said wrong, you know, like, and let us grow, because we are going to learn from this as well. So from everybody here at God TV, we say God bless you, we love you, and we'll see you on the next podcast.